Get your ears wrapped around the Golden State Media Concepts Basketball Podcast. All the scoop you need to know from college basketball to the NBA and even March Madness. News of your rising stars. Topics on and off the hardwood. This is the Golden State Media Concepts Basketball Podcast.
Hello and thank you for tuning in to the GSMC Basketball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, as always, Isiah Quiroz. In today's podcast, we'll take a look at some of the big games over the last few days that I also had predictions for, to see how I did. We'll talk about another career night for Luka before talking about some big news about the Blazers and some possible news surrounding the Thunder. We'll talk about the Hawks finally getting a win in San Antonio, then talk about a big upset before ending the show with who's hot and who's not. So starting off, we're going to talk about, some of the predictions about the biggest games for the last few days that I had previously made on the last podcast. There were 4 games that I picked, and a little backstory. The last time I did some predictions, it didn't turn out very well for me. I only got 1 out of 3 guesses right. But a little foreshadowing, I did very well this time for these 4 games that I picked this time. The first game we're going to talk about is the Jazz versus the Pelicans. Now, in this game, there's a little backstory to it. The Jazz were on a 10-game win streak. The Pelicans had just gotten some of their bigger stars back from illness, like Ingram and Redick, and a couple more other players that contributed well, like Favors. And the Jazz, they did control the first in this quarter, but the Pelicans fought back pretty tough in the second to take a 56-49 lead into halftime. Then the third quarter, the Jazz regained control with Mitchell scoring points, and it seemed like they had the momentum going into the fourth. But from there, it was kind of a battle between Ingram and Mitchell, who scored 14 and 13 respectively. Mitchell hit a big 3 to extend their lead late in the game, but the Pelicans just wouldn't go away after blowing that lead that they had. And with the clock winding down, Ingram rose up for a fadeaway shot for the win and hit it with 0.2 of a second remaining. But wait, the game wasn't over yet. The Pelicans were up by 1, and there was 0.2 of a second remaining. So at that point, what else can you do but just throw the ball up and hope for a tip-in around the rim? So that's exactly what the Jazz did. On the last second heave on the inbound pass, the officials called a foul, which honestly I thought was ridiculous. It didn't look enough to be a foul. It was a foul, obviously, on the Pelicans. They were holding Gobert back from being able to jump up, or so that the refs thought, but it didn't look like it was enough for me to call a foul there. But Gobert ended up going to the line to shoot free throws, and he made only 1 of 2, so ball doesn't lie, but it did end up sending them to OT, and the Pelicans from there just took over the game. Brandon Ingram especially, he went off. He had 5 points and 3 assists in that OT, which doesn't sound like a lot, but it is, because it's a big impact late in the game where, every player on that team is gassed and you have to find a way to run your offense. And he was doing that. He was really running the offense really well and setting up his team to be successful, especially Derek Favors, who had 7 in overtime. So the Pelicans end up winning this game 138-132, snapping the Utah Jazz's 10-game win streak. Very, very impressive stuff for them. Mitchell did have a fantastic game in this game, but it just wasn't enough for them. He had 46 points, 6 rebounds, and 2 assists. Big, big numbers for Mitchell. Something that, I've been waiting to see for a long time now, but he hasn't been as consistent or as aggressive enough to do so. But maybe he can work on building off of this type of play. Bojan Bogdanovic had 26 points, 3 rebounds, 4 assists. Gobert had a pretty big game. 17 points, 14 rebounds with 3 blocks. So as a big man, he really played his role. I think he can probably find a way to get more buckets, honestly, around the rim, because he gets some easy finishes sometimes. And I think he can contribute more than 17. But the 14 rebounds, he's always on the boards. I think he's close to leading the league in rebounds right now. He's definitely up there in the top 5. And then 3 blocks, he really is showing, why he's a former defensive player of the year and just a great rim protector. And then Clarkson, one of their best players since acquiring him, had 15 points and 2 rebounds off the bench. And I was right. Jazz finally lost since acquiring Jordan Clarkson. And I kind of alluded to the fact that I think the Pelicans could win this game just because they've been on the rise. They've been a team that's been playing really well as of late. Their players are finally starting to click, and Ingram is playing fantastic. And speaking of him, you thought Mitchell's 46 points were impressive. Ingram had 49 points. 49. He went off. And not only that, he grabbed 8 boards and had 6 assists as well. 3 of those assists in OT. So he's starting to play really, really well. He's probably one of my picks for the most improved player of the year. And, he's starting to learn how to take over games as well against a really good Utah Jazz team that hasn't lost a lot recently, at least. Derek Favors also added some good numbers, 21 points, 11 rebounds, 3 assists with 2 steals and 3 blocks. So he not only contributed on the offensive side of the floor, but he grabbed 11 boards and had 2 steals and 3 blocks. He was making his presence known, especially since he's been out for a while with illness. So this was a really good game for him. Etuan Moore had 16 points. Lonzo had 13 assists, which is really good for him as a point guard, but he kind of reverted back to how he's been viewed in the league. He shot terribly, 2 for 12. And so he did not have, a lot of impact on the offensive end other than assisting his team, which sometimes, you got to find a way to impact the game, and that's how he did it, but didn't shoot the ball well at all. But in the end, Pelicans busting up the Jazz's win streak. Prediction number 1, I got right. The next game was the Celtics versus the Bucks. There was no Jaylen Brown in this game due to injury. He was kind of day-to-day. They weren't sure if they're going to get him back in time. And then the Bucks, honestly, they just coasted in this game. They took the lead, and they never trailed in this game. At one point, they were up 27. Bucks actually set a new season high with 76 points in the first half. The Celtics did make a late comeback towards the end of the game, where they outscored the Bucks 36-22 to only be 4 points down, but in the end, it just wasn't enough, and the Bucks won 128-123. And then I looked it up. Boston apparently had a streak of 5 straight games where they won games after trailing by 15. So they were down 15. They had 5 games where they came back and won, dating all the way back to November 10th, 2017. That was the longest streak in NBA history, and now it's over. I mean, if you dig yourself in a hole against a team like against the Bucks, you're never going to be able to dig yourself out of it. And that's kind of where my prediction came from about picking the Bucks in this game, because how are you ever going to try and stop Giannis? He's ridiculously good, and this Bucks team is too indestructible right now to put yourself in a hole early on. It's going to be impossible to try and get back in this game. They did play pretty well. Kemba especially went off. He had 40 points, 11 rebounds, 3 assists. I think he should get those assist numbers up, but since he scored 40 points, I'll give him a break. Marcus Smart, who started for Jaylen Brown this game, really stepped up. He had 24 points, 4 rebounds, 2 assists, so he added his contribution for sure. Tatum a little underwhelming with 17 points, 7 rebounds, 3 assists. But other than that, Celtics really didn't have any big contributions, and so those 3 were not enough to beat a Bucks team that's just rolling right now, led by Giannis, who got his 35th double-double of the season. That's insane. He's been extremely consistent and always has been effective and impactful in his last few games. He had 32 points, 17 boards, 7 assists with 2 blocks. So there's not much more you could say about this man. He's going to be the MVP again this year, back-to-back, first person since Steph. So he's really proven why he's such a force in this league, and the Bucks keep rolling. Middleton as well. I've given him a lot of stick this year because I just don't think he contributes enough, to be honest with you, and especially since he's got his max contract or whatever, what have you. But in this game, he played really well. He had 23 points, 6 rebounds, and 4 assists with 2 steals. So if he can play consistently like that, I can see why he gets a big contract for sure. But to be the second man to Giannis, you need to be more impactful. Numbers like this definitely help his cause. DiVincenzo had 19 points, Brook Lopez had 16, and George Hill had 13. So they just had a little more contributions throughout the squad to really help them propel them over this Boston Celtics team that has been struggling as of late. And that's kind of why I lean towards the Bucks, who have been very consistent all year. Prediction number 2, right. Number 3, Heat versus the Thunder. This one is a little back and forth for me because the Thunder are such an up-and-coming team, and the Heat are too. They're very surprising this year, but I went with the Heat on this one. I talked about how Nunn was coming off a big game, and I thought he'd continue that, and he definitely did. I also talked about how if Steven Adams doesn't play, that Adebayo would definitely eat. Steven Adams didn't play, and Adebayo played really well, so right on both of those fronts. For large portions of this game, the Heat were very much in charge with a 61-47 lead at halftime and a 105-83 lead with 8 minutes left in the fourth. But this is kind of where the Thunder make their push. And, after a big three from Paul, all of a sudden they were within 7. The Thunder, I don't know what it is about them this year, but they have a reputation of falling way behind in the beginning of games and making very impressive efforts to make a comeback. But, as of late, they've been falling short, including in this game. The Thunder have had moments where they come back from big deficits and won games. There was a big stretch where they were doing that consistently, but they couldn't do it in this game. They lose 115-108. Gallinari played really well. He had 27 points, 6 rebounds, and 4 assists. Schroeder had 18 points, 7 rebounds, 8 assists off the bench. So I always say it whenever I talk about the Thunder. Having him come off the bench as a backup point guard, that's a luxury to have because he could definitely be a starting point guard pretty much at any other team that doesn't have a Chris Paul on their team. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander had 18 points, 5 rebounds, 8 assists. A little quiet for him. I expect him to score a little more. And then speaking of quiet, Chris Paul, not his best game. He's been very good this year as a whole, but he wasn't that impactful this game. He had 14 points, 3 rebounds, and 6 assists. Not his best numbers, not his best performance. But on the other side of the ball, the Heat played really well. Kendrick Nunn followed up a really great game with 22 points, only 2 rebounds and 2 assists, but the 22 points were a team high. Adebayo had 21 points, 8 rebounds, and 5 assists. And then Butler was very, very impactful in many different ways. He had 14 points, 10 rebounds, 7 assists with 2 steals and a block. Early on in the year, I kind of talked about how I wanted Butler to score more, but I'm now starting to realize Butler's real role on this team is just to impact his team and be that veteran presence for, guys like Kendrick Nunn, who's coming out of the G League and really finding his way and playing really well, and Tyler Hero as well, a rookie. He's impacting the game in many different ways other than just scoring buckets, and I can appreciate that from Jimmy Butler for sure. And the fact that he added 2 steals and a block, very impressive. The Heat ended up having 4 more players in double figures, so all in all, they just had great contribution throughout the team, whereas the Thunder kind of didn't get enough throughout their roster to really help that comeback become, a win. So the Heat beat the Thunder. Prediction number 3, got it right. Lakers versus Rockets, with my predictions on the line to be 100%. I chose the Lakers in this one in this big Western Conference matchup. The Rockets battled well in the first half, and they had a 6-point lead at the end of it, largely due to the fact that Westbrook was rolling. So Rockets going up 6 at the halftime, and they're playing really well with Westbrook being the one that leads you, not James Harden. Most people would kind of think, okay, the Rockets might go on and win this game, especially since the Lakers were playing without Anthony Davis, who has been sidelined due to injury for quite some time now. So he had 22 points on 9 of 12 shooting. So he was just having his way against smaller guards matched up against him because Russell Westbrook, even though he's a point guard, he's a big dude. He's a physical guy. So it's tough for other point guards to try and stop him. So who was it? It was Rajon Rondo, who wasn't playing in this game, but due to injury. But he made a suggestion at halftime. Because he couldn't impact the game on the court, he did it with his mind and with his coaching. He said, why not put the guy who scored only 4 points against the Magic, where they lost that game, on him, a.k.a. Kyle Kuzma. I said Kyle Kuzma wouldn't have as bad of a game this time, and I was right. I thought he would just pop off offensively, which he kind of did in this game for sure, but defensively, he played a huge role. In the second half, Kuzma was the main defender on Russell Westbrook, and he made it very tough for him to get any type of bucket, and he only added 13 more points to his tally. He slowed down Russ tremendously. Played a great game. The Lakers used a strong third quarter where they outscored the Rockets 32-17 to really propel them, in the fourth quarter, and the Rockets never came closer than 7. And the Lakers ended up taking this game 124-115. Like I said, they were without AD, who missed the last 5 games, so it's even more impressive that the Lakers can somehow win this game. Without Rondo, without, Anthony Davis, those are 2 big key players for the Lakers, whereas the Rockets are kind of getting all their players back. So it was definitely interesting to see the Lakers are proving their dominance in the West right now against the Rockets team that, could be a title contender. Kuzma actually had his own injury scare in this game. His ankle that he hurt with Team USA kind of turned over on someone's foot, and he just left the game real quick, taped it up, and said he wanted to get right back out there. He looked to be okay. No further, decision whether or not he should sit out or not. Westbrook did work. He's the first Rocket player besides Harden, to score 30 points in 4 straight games since Tracy McGrady did it for 6 straight games in 06-07. So Westbrook's rolling. He's starting to find a rhythm for sure. He scored 35 points, had 9 rebounds and 7 assists, so very close to a triple-double, and he also had 3 steals. So he was buzzing around, playing really well. Harden, his running mate, had 34 points, 6 rebounds, 7 assists. Pretty good numbers for those two. The only numbers that really stick out to me, though, is the fact that these two had 11 turnovers combined. These two have the ball in their hands the majority of the game. I understand that, but 11 turnovers is just poor. It's really poor, and I expect a little bit better from those two for sure. Eric Gordon had 13 off the bench, and House Jr. had 10 off the bench, but that's it for double-digit scoring. So you had your 2 biggest players score 35, 34. It's pretty good, but other than that, you had no contribution, and it's tough against a team led by LeBron James, who had 31 points, 5 rebounds, and 12 assists. 12 assists. He's a point forward. He's crazy, leading the league in assists, helping his team succeed. Kuzma had 23 points, 8 rebounds. Followed up a terrible performance against the Magic where he only had 4 points. With a 23-point performance and 8 boards, he's really making his presence known. I mean, it's kind of just a lull in his game against the Magic. Picked it right back up. Took on a defensive, mission, like assignment against a player like Russell Westbrook and took it to him. Played really well. Very big impact for him. Big reason why they won this game. Danny Green had 20 points and 5 rebounds with 4 steals. So that's pretty impressive to me as well. And then KCP had 20. And the Lakers roll over Houston, who are now on a 3-game skid. And they dropped all the way to 6 now in the West. So that's just another thing. It's very close in the Western Conference. So if you lose a couple games, you're going to move a lot of spots. Houston is a half game back from 5th place, where the Dallas Mavericks and Luka Doncic are sitting right now. And the other night, Luka had a career night. But is anyone surprised? We talk about it next.
Are you looking for the very best NFL and college football podcast? Then check out the GSMC Football Podcast. Get the latest football news both on and off the field. From the NFL Draft to trades to the rumor mill to the NFL Combines. They got you covered. That's GSMCpodcast.com/football-podcast. Get updates on college rivalries, game day insights, and much, much more. It's football talk the way you want it. This show eats, sleeps, and breathes football. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
Welcome back to the GSMC Basketball Podcast. We just talked about some big games that happened over the last couple days. I also had some predictions on those. The last time I did predictions, it didn't go so well. I was 1 for 3. But this time around, I had to redeem myself. I went 4 for 4 with my predictions. We talked about how the Rockets in a big Western Conference matchup dropped their 3rd in a row to the Los Angeles Lakers, and now the Rockets have dropped all the way to 6th place in the West. They're half game back from 5th place, Dallas Mavericks. And the Mavericks have been very good this year. They've had some ups and downs, but they've been consistent enough to stay in the playoff picture consistently. They haven't had Porzingis for the last 10 games. So that's been a tough road for them, especially since they got to rely so much on Luka Doncic to completely carry their offense. When they have Porzingis out there, it adds another element. It adds another dynamic, where he can go dominate inside, even stretch out the floor because he's got crazy range too for such a tall guy. He's such a big center. But yeah, if they get him back, it just adds so many more elements to the game, takes off the pressure for Luka Doncic, and he's set to come back Tuesday against the Clippers. That's a big matchup against an LA Clippers team that's now finally in 2nd place. We always thought both LA teams should be 1 and 2 in the West, and it's finally happened. So the Clippers are kind of on a roll recently, getting back up there. So yeah, it'd be a tough test for the Mavericks, a tough game for Porzingis to come back in, honestly. But he said, quote, "The way I'm feeling, I don't see why there should be any hurdles. But you never know. So I'm just putting in the work, making sure the knee is strong, leg is strong," end quote. He went through a full practice on Sunday and has another practice Monday before really, really hitting the hardwood against a great team in the Clippers, like I said. This year he's been averaging 17.3 points per game, 9.4 rebounds per game, and 2.1 blocks per game. So like I said, that's a good bump. It just makes them more dynamic, and has a big impact. I know he can average more than 17.3 points per game too. He can definitely have a big impact for this Dallas Mavericks team that could make a push to be top 3 in the West. They were up against a Portland team that was coming off a big win against Houston that we broke down last podcast. It was kind of like a revenge game for Melo. He went off, played really well. And I definitely didn't expect Portland to take down Houston, especially the way that Portland's been playing this year. But in this game against the Dallas Mavericks, Doncic was the one who got off to a hot start. He had 14 in the first quarter, hitting 4 threes. And I'll tell you why that's important later on. It was close at the end of the first with the Blazers trailing by 2. But in the second, McCollum ended up going out injured. And that's a big blow for this Blazers team that hasn't had Nurkic all year or Collins like all season long. I think he only played a few games. And so this Blazers team that's been struggling mightily all season now loses their second best scorer in CJ McCollum. And it's just such a huge blow for them. I mean, that means they had to put all the pressure on Lillard, who himself almost missed this game due to illness, and he had to carry the load. He had 25 points in the first half compared to Luka's 23. So he had the game's high, but the Mavericks were up 72-63 at half. Then, out of nowhere, Tim Hardaway Jr. decided to have himself a quarter, scoring 15 points in the third to keep their lead at 9 going into the fourth. The Blazers only got within 5 before the Mavericks went on to win 120-112. Lillard only had 2 points in the fourth quarter. So, honestly, my theory is that because he almost was out of this game due to illness, I think he got fatigued. And, he definitely alluded to this a little bit in his post-game interview. He said, yeah, whenever you're on the court, you're going to feel it. But, because of their injuries and because, how their team's been doing as of late, he could never use that as something he can lean on. He can never use that as an excuse. Obviously, I'm not Damian Lillard, so I can use the excuse for him. That's what happened. 2 points in the first quarter after having 25 in the first half. A player like Damian Lillard, where, in the fourth quarter, it's Dame time. Not 2 points in the fourth. That's not how he plays. So he definitely burned out, but he led this team either way. He had 34 points and had 10 assists with 2 steals. So you can't really fault the guy. He put in work. He had a little bit of help from Melo, who's been playing really well as of late. He had 22 points and 5 boards. Hassan Whiteside, big game for the big man. I haven't really heard too much about Hassan Whiteside. I mean, I feel like he could be one of the better centers in the league, but he just doesn't show his numbers consistently. But in this game, he put up some big numbers. 21 points, 18 rebounds with 5 blocks. That's a really big performance. And to have, your makeshift big three in Lillard, Melo, and Whiteside put up big numbers like this, and then they still lose to the Dallas Mavericks and they lost CJ McCollum to injury. Like, it can't get much worse for the Portland Trail Blazers. It's honestly just tough, especially since now they're not even in the playoff picture right now. They're sitting in, let's see, 9, 10, 11th. They're behind the Phoenix Suns and the San Antonio Spurs and the Grizzlies, who are in that 8th spot right now. They're 3 games back from being in 8th place in a playoff spot. And they just lost CJ McCollum and lost this game where, their 3 better players in this game performed really well. I mean, for Whiteside to get 18 boards, almost a 20-20 game with 5 blocks, monster game. And the biggest reason why they just couldn't pull this off is because Luka Doncic was on the other side of the ball. The kid's incredible. I mentioned it was a career night for him, and because it was a career night for him, the reason why is because he had 8 threes in this one. That's his highest career total in a game for him. He had 35 points, 8 rebounds, and 7 assists. And, he leads his team to another W. And this is without Porzingis, like we said before. So Luka Doncic, honestly, is just something else. Tim Hardaway Jr., who really has been playing really well this year, really establishing himself on this Dallas Mavericks team when they've needed him to, because, they've had injuries, and when Luka went down, what have you, people had to step up. Tim Hardaway Jr., he's been stepping up as of late. Had 29 points, 4 rebounds in this game. And then Seth Curry, he's another one. I feel like he's been playing really well off the bench too. Maybe not as consistently as, the Dallas Mavericks would want him to be, but from time to time he puts up big numbers, and he has the ability to do so. He's very efficient, and he's one of the better three-point shooters in the league, percentage-wise. So it's really good for him when he performs well. He had 16 points off the bench, added in 4 rebounds and 3 assists. So when he's able to impact the game coming off the bench like that, the Dallas Mavericks are tough to beat. Even though they didn't have big numbers, they just had a really good team effort in this one. And, they beat the Portland Blazers. And after a big win against the Rockets for the Blazers, they fall to the Mavs. And they would drop another one in their next matchup against the Thunder. We talk about that and some news surrounding both the Blazers and the Thunder coming up right after this.
Check out the show that's built on the MMA. From the UFC to extreme cage fighting, they got the fights covered. Check out the GSMC MMA podcast. Get the latest news on past or upcoming fights. Join us as we talk to and about some of the biggest names in the MMA, past, present, and future. When it's the fight game, there's just one show to check out. GSMCpodcast.com/MMA-podcast. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
Welcome back to the GSMC Basketball Podcast. We just talked about how the Dallas Mavericks and Luka Doncic having a career night beat the Portland Trail Blazers, who were coming off a pretty big win against the Houston Rockets, so, anything could happen. But then CJ McCollum went down with an injury. Tough blow for their offense, of course. Lillard couldn't carry it all by himself, and the Mavericks went on to win that game. And the Blazers lost the game, back on the losing end of their streak, and it would be extended to 2 games in a row because they dropped their next game against the Thunder. I kind of alluded to some team news about both teams, but we'll start with the Blazers since we've been talking about them already. They just made a trade. Before I say anything about this trade, I have to say I honestly think they lost this trade, and when they're playing as bad as they are this year, I don't understand this move. I really don't. They decided to trade Kent Bazemore, Anthony Tolliver, and 2 future second-round picks to the Kings for Trevor Ariza, Wenyen Gabriel, and Caleb Swanigan. 2 of those players I barely know anything about. Trevor Ariza is the biggest name. It's the biggest names in this trade. Bazemore, Ariza. I don't understand. This deal does shed $12.5 million in salary for the Blazers. Maybe they're just, freeing up some money. But I don't understand it. The Kings need something, and, Ariza was not offering it. He was only averaging 6 points in 32 games compared to his 14.1 in his 43 games last year with Washington. So Ariza can put up big numbers, but he just hasn't been doing it for the Kings. So why is this an attractive trade for the Portland Blazers, I wonder? I mean, he's under all of his career averages right now. Not percentage-wise, but in terms of rebounding and assisting. I'm not sure what the Blazers want out of him. Maybe trying to recreate a type of dynamic that he brought when he was with Houston for that span where they were really good. It was, Chris Paul, James Harden, Gordon, Tucker, and then Ariza. Throw it to him in the corner, hit some threes, what have you. His percentages were good, and they are still very good shooting the ball. But I just don't see how he can lift this Blazers team to a higher level than what they've been playing right now, especially if he's only averaging 6 points with the Kings. So I'm not sure how that's going to work out. It's yet to be seen, but we'll see how it works out. Bazemore, on the other hand, I think is a better player. He's also a little younger, more athletic, and he's a very good two-way player. He gets it done on the defensive end as well. And I feel like he's, had an unfair go in the league so far. He's kind of bounced around a couple times. He was with Portland just now. He was only averaging 7.9 points per game with 4 rebounds, but he does average a steal per game and almost a block per game. So, he, like I said, he's a good two-way guard. He's a valuable player in my opinion. Sacramento also gets 2 second-round picks as well, which I kind of think steals the win of the trade. Because if you look at just the 2 big names in Bazemore and Ariza, you can make arguments that Ariza's percentages are still good, and maybe in a situation where Damian Lillard is your point guard, CJ McCollum is your second man, and you could just throw to a catch and shoot player like Trevor Ariza, it'll help and lift their offense. But I think Bazemore is the better player in my opinion, so I think it leans a little more to the Kings side already. But now they get 2 second-round picks as well. And we've seen that in the draft, there can be steals in the second round. So to get 2 of those, I think helps the fact that the Sacramento definitely won this trade and furthers the thought about why did Portland make this trade, other than maybe just to free up money. The Kings also got veteran presence in Tolliver, who has made his way around the league for sure. In fact, he was on Sacramento 2016 to 2017 season. So he's definitely a familiar face. Nice to have him back in the organization. I think he's just a good quality guy. His best year was actually in Golden State, so he has the potential to go real high, but he's not going to do anything phenomenal for them. His averages are nothing too eye-popping for sure. I think he's just a good veteran presence for, a young-ish Kings team that it has been struggling lately. Portland felt like they needed another shooter, and on the other side of the ball, that they were playing in this game were the Thunder, who have been centered around trade talks pretty much since the beginning of the season based on their roster because, like we talked about, the Thunder were a team that once they traded away Paul George and then they traded away Russell Westbrook, this was going to be a situation where they were just going to blow it up and start it over. But for whatever reason, the Thunder are really good. They have some good pieces for sure, but no one expected them to be a playoff team like this. Everyone expected them to be the place where people go to get good pieces in trades. Chris Paul especially, who is playing some of his best basketball this season. He's leading the league in points and field goals made in the final 5 minutes of regulation and overtimes of games within 5 points. So, quick translation, he's clutch. He's crazy good at closing games and knowing when to impose himself on a game and just take over. From the very beginning of when this trade that landed CP3 and OKC happened, Miami's kind of been looking to be a potential third team as a part of that trade. That would see, Chris Paul land in South Beach for, to be with a contending team. Much to everyone's surprise, like I said before, both teams are contenders. We knew Miami would be decent, probably would be in that playoff talk, especially since the East just isn't as good, but they're second in the East right now. No one expected them to be that good. Their half-point record of 29-12 is a better start than their most recent championship season in 2012-2013. They have a better start right now than when they had LeBron James, Dwayne Wade, and Chris Bosh. You're kidding me. And they won the championship that year. So, that could be a really good sign for them if they want to push for a championship run, but they have to go through the Milwaukee Bucks, and I don't see that happening. So they'll probably lose in the Eastern Conference Finals if they continue to be as good as they are. Kendrick Nunn, he's a crazy player out of the G League. Hero, he's a lottery pick that's excelling. Dragic could maybe be sixth man of the year, and Adebayo is going off this year, really establishing himself on this team and in this league. So I think the Miami Heat didn't and don't want to disrupt that really. But it makes me wonder, would it be good for them for Chris Paul to be on this team? And my first instinct is yes. Of course it would be good. You're adding Chris Paul, one of the best field, generals in the game. One of the best true point guards in the league. He's the last one. And if you run through his offense, you're going to be successful. I don't think he meshed well with James Harden because James Harden was a dominant player. He had to control the entire game. And so Chris Paul really couldn't play, his style. The Rockets couldn't play his style. But now that he's in complete control of the Thunder, I think that's a big reason why, they're excelling as much as they are. He's like a coach on the floor. And I think if you move that into where the Miami Heat are doing right now, combined with the fact that they're just such a physical team, add that with Jimmy Butler's star power and, leadership presence, I think they could be a crazy good contender. Obviously, Kendrick Nunn's playing really well, but if he could still excel coming off the bench, not necessarily have to be a starter and have Chris Paul just run things, I don't know. I think the Miami Heat could be really, really dangerous. So anyway, back to what we were talking about. These two teams matched up in Portland and the Thunder. They did take the L in this game, 119-106. We kind of talked about how the Thunder had grown a bit of a habit starting games slow, so who other than Chris Paul to right the ship? He scored 21 of his 30 points in this one in the first half. In the first half, he decided, you know what, I'm tired of us starting slow. I'm going to go off. And so he did that. And especially since Gallinari was out in this game, he had to step up, and he did. He did just that. Because of the trade that was happening, plus all the injuries that we talked about that the Blazers have had, they only had 8 players available in this game. That's tough. That's really tough. I mean, some teams only use 8 players anyway in games, but to only have 8 players available as a whole, it leaves no room for error. Lillard especially, he had to play through illness again, and he kind of kept him in this game for just as long as he could. They were down 64-57 at half, and he had 24 in the half. So he had another great first half, but then the Thunder extended their lead, and then they cruised to the finish. And I think the Blazers probably burnt out. Terry Stotts says maybe, but he mostly thinks that it was Chris Paul who took over this game, which he did. He had 30 points, 4 rebounds, and 7 assists on 11 of 15 shooting. So he was impactful, he was efficient, played extremely well. He got a little help from Gilgeous Alexander. He had 22 points, 10 rebounds, 5 assists. Those are better numbers for him. I can see him averaging close to those numbers for sure. Nerlens Noel, who recently returned from injury, he had 15 in this. And then Schroeder as well came off the bench, had 15 of his own. And for the Blazers, I mean, it was mostly just Lillard. He had 34 points, 6 assists in this game. And so after having 24 points in the first half, I think he burnt out again. Only had 10 in the second half. I mean, you only have 8 players available, so he's not coming out a lot. And he's sick, so, I mean, it's tough. It's tough for a team like this to even try and get up and want to play in this game at all. A name you probably haven't heard too much, second-year guard out of Duke, Gary Trent Jr. He dropped 30. With CJ McCollum out, someone had to step up. Ended up being Trent Jr. out of nowhere. He added 5 rebounds as well. That 30 points that he dropped is his new career best, and previously it was 19. So that's a pretty big step up for him. Great game for him. But after that, there was no contributions from anyone. So it was really tough for the Blazers. They lose this game, and the Thunder get back on the winning side of things. We did talk some trades for the Blazers and some potential ones down the road for the Thunder, perhaps. But in the next segment, we'll talk about another one that happened in Atlanta this time, coming up next.
Check out the show built around the women of MMA. From the UFC to the extreme cage fighting, we got the fights covered.
Listen.
It's the Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast. The latest news of upcoming fights, discussions of previous matches. Join us as we talk to and about the biggest names in women's mixed martial arts. Past, present, and future. When it's the women's fight game, you know where to listen to. The Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast.
Welcome back to the GSMC Basketball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Isiah Quiroz. We just talked about a trade that Portland did, sending Bazemore down to the Kings in return for Ariza, which is kind of surprising. Didn't expect that. We talked about some potential trades, potentially, with Chris Paul going to Miami. That's an interesting topic of discussion, and I think it would be really good for the Heat. Obviously not so good for the Thunder, but maybe they don't necessarily want to go and win right now. They could definitely rebuild with all the pieces that they have. And then we talked about their game where the Thunder did win this one. Portland had only 8 players available, so they really didn't stand much of a chance, especially since Lillard was playing through illness again. And so, speaking of those trades, another trade that happened in Atlanta. The Atlanta Hawks have been struggling all year long. They're still tied. Actually, I think they have the second worst record in the league now. The Warriors are definitely the worst in the league as of right now. But they finally got in the double digits for wins. They played against the San Antonio Spurs, who have had a bit of an up and down season. They're sitting in a game and a half out of a playoff spot right now. San Antonio got off to a very slow start, trailing the Hawks 67-58 at halftime. And I'm not really sure what it was. Greg Popovich said that they just weren't focused, weren't executing, the offense properly. And I don't think he was very happy about it at all. Not gonna lie. But then they woke up and just destroyed the Hawks in the third quarter. They outscored them 41-21. And during that time, they had a 22-3 run, where the Hawks effectively blew a 13-point lead. The Spurs led by 11 heading into the fourth. And at this point, a Greg Popovich team with 11 heading into the fourth against Atlanta Hawks, who have been just garbage all year long. You think the Spurs are going to run away with this one. The Hawks started making a push for a comeback, especially with Trae Young hitting with some big threes, but a turnover that saw DeRozan bring it the other way, outlet to Patty Mills, and then an easy layup for two. It kind of looked like as if that was going to be the dagger, because it pushed the lead to 120-114 with less than a minute 30 to play. So even furthering my point, Greg Popovich-led team, you're up by 6, a minute 30 to go. I just didn't expect this next part to happen. Trae Young got to the line quickly right after they gave up that buckets to Mills. That, he obviously went to the line, hit both free throws, and then he had a great drive with 50 seconds left to come within 2 points. Then with 6.3 seconds left, Herter hit a game-winning 3. I don't know how this was all possible. It was super cool, too, because obviously you would expect Trae Young to take this 3 to try and tie the game. But he drew a double team beyond the back pass to, I forget who it was, but then he outlet to Herter, who hit a 3 with confidence. And so the Hawks took the lead, and then DeRozan, he went down to try and convert a fadeaway jumper and take the lead back. But it rimmed out, and the Spurs end up losing 121-120 against the Atlanta Hawks. Crazy. And even crazier, the Atlanta Hawks had their first win in San Antonio since February 15th, 1997. That is a long, long losing streak snapped. 6 players on the Hawks weren't even born yet. Wait a minute. I wasn't even born yet. That's insane to think about. But the Hawks finally beat it. They finally win a game. They finally get into double digits for the W column. So good on them. And of course, who was it other than Trae Young leading them to a victory? 31 points, 5 rebounds, and 9 assists. Kid's a stud. Reddish helped out as well. 22 points, 5 rebounds, 4 assists, with 4 steals and a block. Getting it done on the defensive end. That's huge for sure against a San Antonio Spurs team that, probably don't make too many mistakes with, running an offense through Greg Popovich's vision. So very good game for him. John Collins had a quiet double-double with 18 points, 10 rebounds. Herter, who had the game winner, had 18 points as well. And then Vince Carter, who got a real nice standing ovation from San Antonio, probably be his last time playing there. He had 14 points in this one. On the other side of the ball, Aldridge had a pretty monster game, 30 points and 5 rebounds. But obviously it wasn't enough. DeRozan as well almost had a triple-double, just impacting the game in all facets. 25 points, 9 rebounds, 9 assists. Very close triple-double. DeJounte Murray had a double-double of his own. 13 points, 12 rebounds, and 5 assists. And, yeah, the Spurs drop a game. They came back, kind of woke up in the second half, but then just blow their own lead. So it was definitely interesting to see. Very interesting back-and-forth game. Very exciting as well. And then following this game, the Hawks made some moves like I kind of alluded to earlier. The Hawks made a trade of their own. They acquired point guard Jeff Teague and Trevion Graham for Alan Crabb. The main reason they've been looking in the market for a long time actually for a backup point guard, is just to help Trae Young. Because Trae Young is a one-man army on this team. The Hawks offense, pretty good when he's out there on the floor because, he's the one carrying the load. But when he's not on the floor, they're terrible. They're awful. And so obviously they need some help in the backup point guard realm. And so welcome back Jeff Teague. He played 7 seasons with Atlanta. It's where he started his career. But in 34 games with the Minnesota Timberwolves, he averaged 13.2 points per game, 2.6 rebounds per game, and 6.1 assists. So coming off the bench, those are some pretty good numbers to have. So maybe this could work out pretty well for the Atlanta Hawks. Graham, who they also got in 33 games, averaged 5.2 points with 3 rebounds. So not a big impact player, but he was kind of just part of it in order to make this acquisition. I'm surprised that, Minnesota made this trade because all they got in return was Crabb, who is averaging 5.1 points per game and 2.3 rebounds. So I'm not really sure how it works. I did read that it was a 3-team trade, but I'm just not sure who else or what else was involved. But this was a really great trade for the Hawks, I think. A big steal for sure. Unfortunately, though, it didn't work out for them on Teague's debut. The Detroit Pistons, out of all teams, spoiled it. And mostly D-Rose. Detroit won this game 136-103. So it was just a complete blowout. And a complete blow to the gut as well because, you think you're bolstering up your team. You think things are going to start getting better, but nope. Detroit reminds you that you're the worst team in the Eastern Conference with a 33-point blowout. And against Detroit, too, who have so many injuries to the point where now D-Rose isn't coming off the bench. He's starting. Blake Griffin's probably going to be out for the whole year. And it's pretty much just Andre Drummond. But D-Rose has been really good this year and been really good as of late as well. In this game, he went off. He had 27 points, 2 rebounds, and 9 assists. So he's playing extremely well right now and kind of turning back the clock, which makes me really happy to see. Mihailuk, I hope I pronounced that right, had 25 points off the bench. Big game for him. And then Markieff Morris had 22 points off the bench as well. Andre Drummond, he played really well at 16 points, 17 rebounds. He had more rebounds than he had points. This is crazy to me. He also had 5 steals. I don't know what it is about big men getting steals, but 5 steals, that's an impressive stat line for him. John Collins had 20 points, 5 rebounds, and 2 blocks. Hunter had 19 points, 5 rebounds, 3 assists, both for the Atlanta Hawks. And then Trae Young, I think a big reason why they got blown out in this game is, I don't know what it was, but Trey just didn't show up today. He had 16 points. Also added in 8 rebounds and 7 assists, which are good contributions for those columns, but only 16 points for him. Definitely not what I would have expected. Definitely underneath, like very far underneath his average on the season. So it was tough. It's going to be tough for the Hawks to win any games when he's only scoring 16 points. Teague played pretty well with his return to Atlanta. He added 15 points, 3 rebounds, and 7 assists. So their theory of him coming off the bench and adding in some contributions and helping out Trey is definitely true if he can average points like this and have that kind of impact. So I think it's going to take some time, obviously, for the Hawks to get this thing rolling. I think it was tough for them to come off a back-to-back, especially where Trey had to play heavy minutes and take over the game, and they went to the wire. So obviously that can be very taxing, and I think that's why they lost this game. But I think maybe the Hawks can start turning around a little bit. Like I said, upsetting loss for Atlanta. But yeah, maybe they can start turning the page with Teague moving forward. I mean, it is just his first game, and it was on a back-to-back. So, but speaking of upsets, down goes Boston. We'll tell you who they lost to next.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Welcome back to the GSMC Basketball Podcast. We just talked about how the Atlanta Hawks acquired Jeff Teague in a trade, seeing him come back home, which is a great trade for them. They needed help in the backup point guard realm because, let's face it, Trae Young is a one-man army on that team. So when he comes out, it's tough for them to get any type of momentum going on offense. And Jeff Teague has always been one of those players that you would expect to be very good, and I expected him to be super good on the Timberwolves when it was him, Cat, Wiggins. You just thought that squad was going to be good, but he never really panned out. He could be really good as a backup point guard, though, and the fact that he's going back to the team that drafted him is very poetic. So maybe Atlanta can start, turning things around. They did end up losing to the Pistons in Teague's debut, so that was very upsetting. But speaking of upsets, the Celtics lost their second place spot in the East to the Heat a podcast ago. Now they've lost third place. They're sitting in fourth right now, tied with the Pacers with 2 less games played. So they're sitting in fourth pretty comfortably. They're on a 3-game skid though. And during that skid, they lost to the Pistons, who I don't understand how they're winning games at all with the squad that they have and with the amount of injuries they have too. Honestly, it's just Derrick Rose carrying a team right now. They lost to the Bucks, which I'll give a pass for because obviously Milwaukee is just ridiculously good. And now they've lost to the Phoenix Suns. The Phoenix Suns. I mean, they're not god awful. Like the Suns aren't as bad as they've been in years past, but still. They're 18-24 and in 10th in the Western Conference. They're 6-4 in their last 10 though, so they've been kind of turning the page a little bit, playing a little bit better, and that hot start that they had, where they were in a playoff spot for just a couple weeks, I think. A lot of people were surprised by that, but maybe they can get back up to that. But let me give you some background. Boston has a great record against teams under 500. Their record is 20-6 against teams that just don't win games. And the Suns, on the other hand, are 3-13 against teams over 500. So if I was a betting man, I'm going to bet that the Celtics, one of the top teams in the Eastern Conference, are going to beat the Suns, one of the worst teams in the Western Conference. But something I always say on this podcast is any team in the NBA can win on any given day. And this just proves that. But no, yes, so the Suns jumped out to a lead and never looked back. They led for pretty much the entire game. Phoenix had a 60-51 halftime lead, and Booker and Smart were both hot. They were kind of just going back and forth. Booker had 22 points and Smart had 20 points. And it was really just a battle between those two. Phoenix's biggest lead was 16 at one point. And it was almost in jeopardy as the Celtics tried to make a push in the fourth quarter, where they outscored the Suns 43-36 in the fourth quarter. But in the end of the day, it just wasn't enough. It wasn't close to enough. 123-119, and Boston goes down to extend their losing streak, which is just crazy to me. Booker, who has never gotten a triple-double before, but was extremely close in this game. He had 39 points, 10 rebounds, and 9 assists, and 2 steals. They just could not stop him. He is just such a force on the offensive end, and he's probably one of the most slept-on superstars in this league because he's been doing it consistently. But the fact that he's on the Phoenix Suns, he just doesn't get enough credit for how good he's been. Boston even tried many different defensive strategies. Brad Stevens said it, that they tried so many different ways to try and slow him down. They played a zone. They played man coverage. They tried doubling him, but you can't stop Booker when he's hot. I think it was about a year, maybe 2 ago. I can't remember exactly. He dropped 70 points at Boston. That time it wasn't a losing effort. So, I mean, obviously the 70 points are it's tainted by the loss. But it just shows like how lethal he can be. 70 points against Boston at Boston, like who does that? Ayton, who recently came back a couple weeks ago, he had a very solid contribution in this game. He had 26 points and 15 boards. So big game for the big man. Also had 2 blocks, so pretty good at rim protecting in this one. Michael Bridges added 26 points with 3 rebounds and 2 steals and 2 blocks. So they're getting it done on the defensive end. Some good numbers for sure. Dario Saric had 13 points, 11 rebounds, 5 assists for a quiet double-double. And I think even though the Celtics are as good as they are, a big reason why they lost this game, they're missing Kemba Walker and Jaylen Brown. And I didn't want to mention that just because I don't want to make excuses. The Boston Celtics still have better pieces and a better team than the Suns. They should win this game without them, even with their leading scorer in Kemba. I get that. But with the pieces that they have, I still think they have enough to beat a Phoenix Suns team that just hasn't been convincing to me this year. Kemba Walker's out with a knee injury, and Jaylen Brown, he's out with that thumb injury still. They're both day-to-day, so it's not sure. No one's sure when they're going to come back as of yet. Marcus Smart, he had a fantastic game in this one. He's been playing extremely well since he's had to step in for Jaylen Brown, who's been injured, like I just said. In this one, he had a franchise record 11 threes. My goodness, that's Steph Curry, James Harden numbers. Like, he dropped in 11 threes. I would never expect Marcus Smart to be the person that dropped that many. He had 37 points, 5 rebounds, 8 assists with 4 steals. So not only did he drop 11 threes and drop in 37 points, but he also had 4 steals. He had 8 assists too. So he's doing everything he possibly could for this Boston Celtics team in this game. But at the end of the day, it just wasn't enough. Jason Tatum even played really well too. Very good contributions. 26 points. Good numbers for him. 10 boards. And he had 3 steals and a block. So he's doing it on the defensive end and doing it on the offensive end. And Gordon Hayward played really well too. It makes no sense. 22 points, 7 rebounds, 7 assists. These three put up big, big numbers. But the next highest scorer for the Boston Celtics only had 12 points. Boston's on a 3-game skid with just injuries one after another, and they've been having that throughout the whole season. They got to find a way to try and grind out some dubs, especially against Suns, because even though, they can be very impressive, Aiden obviously had a big game. Booker, I expected from him. But, like I said, they just don't have the pieces for that. And Boston, they've got the Lakers coming up next. So, that's an even tougher assignment. And if Kemba and Jalen both don't play, like I said, they're both day-to-day, so it's very possible they don't play. They're going to get rolled over by the Lakers because even without AD, the Lakers are just rolling. They have so much team chemistry. They're led by LeBron James, one of the greatest, if not the greatest player of all time. Kuzma, who's finally stepping up and, making his presence known. Danny Green, who's thriving in being able to just catch passes from LeBron James and throw them up. And they're doing it without Anthony Davis, best team in the Western Conference. They're on very opposite ends of the spectrum right now in terms of, who's hot and who's not. And speaking of that, coming up next, we do who's hot and who's not. Stay with us.
Are you looking to get your college football fix? Looking to get the latest news on your favorite school's team? The GSMC College Football Podcast is your ticket to all things college football. Join us as we talk college football from the national championship, the college rivalries, the bowl game, to the Heisman Trophy. To which conference is the best? We've got you covered for the Big Ten, SEC, Big 12, the Pac-12, ACC, and everything in between. Download the GSMC College Football Podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
Welcome back to the GSMC Basketball Podcast. We just talked about how the Boston Celtics go down against the Phoenix Suns. A lot of people can make the excuse that, Boston didn't have Kemba Walker. They didn't have Jaylen Brown. And, they've just been struggling as of late. But I don't want to use those excuses because I still think that, with Jason Tatum, with Marcus Smart, Hayward, they have enough pieces to be successful and win this game. And, those three that I mentioned did play really well, but it just wasn't enough. The Suns take them down, and, the Celtics are on a 3-game skid heading into LA against LA. So I think that losing streak is probably going to get extended. And they're just going to continue to not be hot, whereas the Lakers have been hot. And they did make my list this time. We're going to start with who's hot. Coming in at number 5, I'm going to go with the Dallas Mavericks, who are on a 4-game win streak right now. They're only 6-4 in their last 10, but the reason why I have them in 5th right now is because they're getting Porzingis back. I mean, they're doing what they've been doing all season long without one of their best players. And he's missed the last 10 games. So to have him come back when they're already on a 4-game win streak can only help them. I mean, I know they're going up against the Clippers next. That's going to be a tough game for them. But I think Luka Doncic is one of the greatest players in the league right now. If it wasn't for Giannis, he would be my MVP choice. And to have Porzingis back against, a Clippers team that has been pretty inconsistent this year, in my opinion, I think it could be a good game for them. They can extend that win streak for sure. Also, I think Seth Curry coming off the bench, that's just quality to have off the bench. He's a very high percentage 3-point shooter. He's evolving his game and finding different ways to score. Tim Hardaway Jr. as well. He's a very solid contributor. And then the Mavericks, to further my point, they beat the 76ers recently, who obviously aren't that convincing either this year, but that's a big team in the Eastern Conference. And, they're 2 games out of third and /4th place right now, depending on matchups and other variables. And they're 2.5 games out from second. So they're moving back up this Western Conference table where they once were before Luka got hurt, Porzingis got hurt, what have you. So I think that the Dallas Mavericks is hot right now and could continue to be hot. Coming in at number 4 for me is the Indiana Pacers. They're on a 5-game win streak. They're 7-3, and they're technically tied for 4th right now. They're only a half a game behind Toronto. Within the last 10 games, they beat the 76ers twice, so they've really had their number. But like I said, obviously the 76ers haven't been that consistent this year. They're only in 6th right now, half a game back from 5th/4th. And, they've been 5-5 in their last 10, so they haven't been that good. But either way, they have a lot of star power. So for them to beat them twice, it just shows their consistency. They also beat the Nuggets in their most recent game, who, on the other hand, have been very consistent. The Denver Nuggets are playing really well this year. They're in 3rd right now, half a game back from 2nd, and they're 6-4 in their last 10 games. So the Denver Nuggets have been playing really well. Pacers beat them, and they're just showing, how good they can be. Sabonis especially got his first first career triple-double the other night. TJ Warren, he's really good as well. And Brogdon, they got great pieces. Brogdon hit an eventual game winner recently against the Timberwolves. So they're having tough matchups and they're winning games. And they've been very consistent, always have been my dark horse in the Eastern Conference. And just a great team to watch. Number 3 on this Who's Hot list is the Utah Jazz. They just lost their game against the Pelicans, but I don't care. They snapped a 10-game win streak, the Pelicans did. But the Utah Jazz had that 10-game win streak, got it snapped, and they responded by absolutely destroying the Kings. So either way, their record as of late has been crazy good. Donovan Mitchell has really started to step up, and he's showing flashes of that amazing rookie year that he had and showing that he can be a big force in this league in terms of star power. And so with him leading your team, Ingles finally stepping up, starting to pour in some more points. Gobert as your center, that's a dangerous team. Mike Conley coming back from injury too. This team is rolling and they're getting people back from injury. It's only going to get better for them. And so they're number 3 on my list. Number 2 are the Grizzlies, who were first in my list last time I did this. But they're still rolling. They're on still a 7-game win streak. They're 8-2 in their last 10. They're still 8th in the West, but they are getting closer to the rest of the pack. But the reason why they're number 2 is because they're on that 7-game win streak. They're 8-2 in their last 10. And I just don't understand how they're this good. I've talked about why they potentially are good. I mean, they got Ja Morant, who, is going to be Rookie of the Year for sure. Jaren Jackson Jr., he's a good pairing for him. Like, they have good pieces, and I understand why they could be good. But this consistently good, I definitely didn't expect that at all, especially with the rookie leading your team. But Ja Morant's a different breed. He's just a different breed. And during this time of their win streak, they destroyed the Clippers a few games ago. They beat the Rockets most recently. And then their most recent game was against the Cavs, which wasn't that impressive. But if you haven't seen this already, check out Ja Morant's pass to Jaren Jackson Jr. It was just absolutely filthy. At first, you think he's going to go up and just spike the ball on someone like he's done previously before. But then he switches it up and throws a behind-the-back pass that almost was an assist. Obviously, Jaren Jackson Jr. ends up missing. But this pass, crazy vision, crazy skill. And so the Grizzlies, they're rolling, and they got a great star in Ja Morant, who's going to lead them for years to come. Number 1 on my Who's Hot list are the Milwaukee Bucks. They're on a 6-game win streak. They're 9-1 in their last 10. They've had a pretty easy schedule lately, with only Boston really posing a threat. But nevertheless, the reason why they're number 1 is because they're so consistent, and they're destroying teams. They beat the Nets by 20. That's even with Kyrie coming back. Obviously, he's not adding that much to the team. Knicks, they beat the Knicks by 26 points. They beat the Blazers by 21 points. And the Kings by 21 points. So they are winning games so convincingly to the point where I just expect them to always win. They're just indestructible. Some honorable mentions for who's hot. I'm going to mention the Pelicans, who are 6-4 in their last 10. The reason I mention them is just because they're an up-and-coming team. They are still very low in the Western Conference table right now, but I think they can be very good, and the fact that they're getting Zion Williamson back is just even scarier. Add Zion Williamson back to a team that just snapped the Utah Jazz's 10-game win streak. I mean, they can be a team that just flips the script in the Western Conference. They're going to be very, very good. The Raptors, they're on a 3-game win streak. They're 7-3 in their last 10. They're third in the East right now, and they beat a good Thunder team. Van Vliet came back, and he scored 29 points in a winning effort against the Wolves. They also got Gasol and Siakam back, so they're on a roll. They're, extremely good. And an honorable mention, even though they should be in my top 5, I just didn't add them this time. The Los Angeles Lakers, but it's obvious that they're one of the hottest teams in the NBA. They're winning by a points margin of 8.6. They're 9-1 in their last 10. They're 34-8. They've only lost 8 games this season. They're 4.5 up on second place, LA Clippers. And, they're just very consistent. So obviously they should be in my top 5. I just didn't add them this time. But that rounds out my top 5. For who's not hot in the league right now, coming in at number 5 are the Cleveland Cavaliers. They're on a 4-game losing streak. They're 2-8 in their last 10. Kevin Love still wants out, and this team has little to no chemistry. They only have 12 wins, and they're losing by almost 9 a game, which is second worst in the league. And they did have a pretty tough stretch where they saw the Grizzlies, Clippers, Lakers, and Nuggets. So I will give them some benefit of the doubt just because those are some tough matchups. But, they can't find ways to win games. And when your main superstar is not happy there, that's even worse. So Cavs are number 5. Number 4 for me are the Brooklyn Nets. They've lost 3 in a row. They're 2-8. And this is even with Kyrie coming back. Their last 6, though, pretty tough. They lost to the Bucks, to the Sixers, to the Jazz. They did beat the Heat, which was impressive. And then they lost to the Thunder. But I think a main reason why the Nets just aren't as good is because, one, very glaringly obvious, Kevin Durant is not on the team yet. But then, number 2, I don't think Kyrie Irving is a good leader. I really don't. I mean, people have attacked that a lot, and I've kind of stayed away from that narrative just because, I want to give him the benefit of the doubt, but I don't see it. I don't see him being a good leader the way, like I mentioned it last podcast, how he says he needs other pieces around him to help his team win. I think it's excuses, honestly, and I don't see him being that positive influence that the Nets need right now. Obviously, they're not going to be that good when they don't have their full roster yet. So, for me, they're number 4 on my list. Number 3, I'm going to combine 2 teams on this. The Kings and the Timberwolves. They're both tied for second worst team in the Western Conference right now. And they're competing really hard to not be tied for the second worst team in the conference. Psych. The Kings have lost 4 games in a row. They're 3-7 in the last 10 games. They did get Bogdanovich back, though, so, maybe they'll change their fate because of that. They lost to the Jazz, and they have, most recently, and they have the Heat next, so it's going to be tough for them to kind of right the ship. And then the Timberwolves on the other end, they lost 5 in a row. They're 3-7 in their last 10, just like the Kings. And they just traded away Teague. And they've got the Nuggets next after losing to the Raptors and losing twice to the Pacers, Thunders, and Rockets. They've had a rough schedule, for sure. But, yeah, they're really bad. And the fact that they traded away Jeff Teague, too, I don't see them getting any better. And I'm not sure what direction they're going to go in at all. But, yeah, both of those teams, I have to combine them because they're competing to be the second worst in the West with how much they're losing right now. Number 2 on my list are the Charlotte Hornets, who have lost 6 in a row. Wow. 2-8 in their last 10. They have had a really tough schedule, not going to lie. They've played the Nuggets, the Jazz, the Raptors, the Pacers, the Mavericks, the Celtics, the Grizzlies in their last 10. That's tough. And even before the last 10, they played the Thunder, Celtics, and Jazz. Like, your schedule can't get any harder than that. I guess when you're one of the worst teams in the NBA, you can only look up at good teams. But, when you get that many top-tier teams in a row, it's honestly tough for them to even try and get any wins, which is why they're on a 6-game losing streak. But they have to be number 2 on my list. Number 1, it still hurts my heart. Still don't want to talk about it, but it's the Golden State Warriors. Lame. Even though they just won against the Magic, they're 1-9 in the last 10. They've had a tough schedule, I guess, as well. Last 5 before the Magic were the Nuggets, Mavericks, Grizzlies, Clippers, and Bucks, which is a really tough schedule. It's just plain and simple. It's tough. They got players back like D'Lo. He's back from injury. I think Draymond Green's still playing on a minutes restriction. They still don't have Kevon Looney, though, which is a big miss. They did re-sign Marquise Chris, which I really like. I think that's going to be a good piece for their future. Stephen Curry has said that, he's looking forward to coming back on, I think it's March 1st, he said. So that could be a huge, huge help, obviously, for this Warriors team. And recently Steph was the sideline reporter when they were playing against the Magic. So, even though they're losing, I feel like they're having fun losing, and they know that eventually they're going to be really good again. But yeah, they're number 1 on my list of who's not hot, and it's tough to watch, especially being a Warriors fan. But yep, that's going to do it for who's hot, who's not. And it's going to do it for our podcast. So thank you for listening to the GSMC Basketball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I would like to ask, as always, that you please remember to subscribe to the show and write a nice review, because it would mean a lot to me and it would really help us out. Also, if you could please follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, I would greatly appreciate it. I'm on Twitter trying to update you guys as much as I can, so that's another good source of information if you want to follow us. But yeah, thank you as always. I'm Isiah Quiroz, and I'll see you guys next time.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Basketball Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.